Daniel Hart didn't believe in fate, until the day he crossed a quiet city park and saw a 6-year-old boy selling a single painting. He was about to walk past, until he read the signature at the bottom, and everything stopped. Daniel Hart was not the kind of man who took walks in the park. His life was built on control, schedules, and polished silence high above the city skyline. But that day was different. Maybe it was the weight of a deal that hadn't gone through, or maybe something quieter, something he couldn't name, pushed him to change his usual route. He stepped out of his sleek car, adjusted his light beige suit, and decided to walk the edge of the park near his office tower before heading back into the elevator that always seemed to swallow him into deadlines. The park smelled like dry leaves, and the air held the kind of cool stillness only autumn could bring. Daniel barely noticed the trees. His mind was already pulling back into numbers and contracts until something unfamiliar caught his eye near one of the old wooden benches. A small boy stood there, maybe 6 years old, wearing a slightly too big sweater, brown hair falling over his eyes, and a single object leaning beside him, a painting. Daniel slowed his steps. The boy was alone. No adults nearby, no street cart or display table, just a canvas resting on the bench and the boy standing silently beside it like he had been waiting for someone. Daniel hesitated. Normally he wouldn't stop. But this wasn't normal. Something about the way the boy stood, quiet and still but not afraid, made Daniel veer toward him. As he approached, the boy lifted his head and looked him straight in the eyes. His own were deep brown, unblinking. "This is my mom's last painting," the boy said without waiting for a greeting. Daniel glanced down at the canvas. It was a landscape, simple, almost serene. A forest curved gently around a lake, with morning mist rising above the water. There was something haunting in the stillness of it, the way the reflection in the water rippled slightly, even though the scene itself was frozen. Then, at the bottom right corner, his eyes caught the signature. And his heart stopped. He knew that name. Elizabeth Marshall. His breath caught somewhere in his chest. The signature was delicate but unmistakable, and 1,000 memories crashed into him at once: her laughter, the way she used to sketch absent-mindedly on napkins, how she once told him she painted lakes when she missed silence. He hadn't heard her name in years. He hadn't spoken it aloud since the day he let her go. He crouched down, trying to keep his voice steady. "Why is it her last painting?" he asked. The boy didn't look away. "Because she died 2 weeks ago," he said. "I don't have anyone else." Daniel blinked, stunned. The sounds of the park seemed to fade. He looked at the boy again, really looked at him, his eyes, the shape of his face, the slight downward curve of his mouth, and something inside him shifted in a way he couldn't explain. The boy didn't beg. He didn't cry. He stood there holding on to the only thing he had left of someone Daniel once believed he'd never see again. And then he realized, this wasn't just a random painting in a park. This was a message from a past he thought was gone. And this boy, he wasn't just anyone. Not anymore. Daniel remained crouched in front of the boy, trying to process everything that was crashing through his mind at once. He felt the quiet weight of the park pressing in around them, as if the entire world had paused to listen to this conversation. The painting still rested beside them, untouched, its image of a peaceful lake suddenly so much more than art. It was memory. It was grief. And it was connection. The boy stood with a kind of calm that only came from having seen too much too soon. Daniel looked into his eyes again, and something there, some flicker of something familiar, refused to let go of him. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Noah," the boy said. "Noah Marshall." That name hit Daniel harder than he expected. It wasn't just that it was Elizabeth's last name. It was the way the boy said it, the quiet certainty of it. Daniel stood slowly, his knees feeling unsteady, and gestured toward the sidewalk. "Can I buy you something to eat, Noah?" he asked. "There's a cafe right there. You don't have to come with me. But you shouldn't be standing out here alone." Noah hesitated for just a moment before nodding. He picked up the painting carefully, holding it with both hands, and followed Daniel toward the small cafe on the corner. The place was warm and mostly empty. Daniel chose a booth in the back, out of sight. He ordered a sandwich and a hot chocolate for the boy and only coffee for himself, though he doubted he'd be able to drink it. They sat in silence for a moment until Daniel finally asked, "Can you tell me what happened?" Noah looked down at the edge of the table, his voice barely above a whisper. "My mom got sick. At first, she kept working. She painted a lot, sold a few, but then she couldn't anymore. Her body stopped listening to her. She said it was something inside her blood. The medicine helped for a while, but we didn't have money for more." Daniel swallowed hard, listening without interrupting. "She started sleeping a lot," Noah continued. "And one morning, she didn't wake up. I called for help, but they were too late. They said she died in her sleep." His fingers gripped the corner of the painting tighter. "They wanted to take me to a home, but I didn't want to leave the apartment. I stayed a few days. Then I brought this." Daniel tried to keep his expression steady, but every word hurt more than the last. "Why this painting? It's her favorite. She never sold it. She said it reminded her of peace. I thought, if I could sell it, maybe I could buy a place to stay. Or find someone to help." Daniel nodded slowly, feeling a knot form in his chest. He looked again at the painting leaning beside the table, and now he saw it differently. Not just a lake. Not just a memory. It was a goodbye, and maybe, just maybe, a message. He leaned forward. "Noah, did your mom ever talk about your father?" Noah shook his head. "She never said his name. Just that he used to wear nice suits and smell like wind. She said he wasn't a bad man, just busy. And gone." Daniel sat back in his seat. The air in his lungs felt too heavy. Every instinct in him wanted to tell the boy the truth right then and there. But how do you explain to a 6-year-old that you might be the man his mother never stopped loving, and the father he never knew he had? Instead, he said, "Noah, would it be okay if I took you somewhere safe? Just for now. Not a home like you were taken to before. A quiet place. Somewhere warm. I promise, I won't make you go anywhere you don't want to." Noah looked up at him, studying his face. He didn't answer right away, but then gave a small nod. Daniel stood, reached for the painting with care, and gently said, "Let's go." And as they stepped back into the fading light of the afternoon, Daniel knew that this wasn't something he could walk away from. Not now. Not ever again. Daniel drove slowly through the city, his mind racing far ahead of the traffic. Noah sat quietly in the back seat, the painting carefully propped beside him, his small hand resting protectively on its frame. The boy hadn't said much since they left the cafe, but Daniel could see him watching the passing buildings through the window, his eyes sharp and observant for someone so young. Daniel didn't turn on the radio. He didn't make small talk. He just drove, trying to ignore the rising pressure in his chest, the weight of a truth he hadn't yet spoken, and the realization that he might have already lost the chance to say it too many years ago. He took them to one of his private residences, not his main home, but a penthouse he used occasionally for quiet meetings or personal retreats. The building had a private entrance, a secure elevator, and a view that made the entire city look like a miniature. As they entered the elevator, Noah looked up at the mirrors lining the walls but said nothing. Daniel noticed his shoes were worn thin at the soles and made a mental note to have clothes and essentials delivered as soon as possible. Inside the apartment, Noah followed him incautiously, eyes scanning the room like he was afraid to touch anything. The space was clean and modern, glass, soft lighting, and neutral tones. It wasn't designed for children, but Daniel suddenly saw the emptiness of it through the boy's eyes. No toys. No photographs. No warmth. Just walls and silence. He led Noah to the kitchen and offered him some water, then showed him the guest room, which had a large window and a cozy chair in the corner. "You can stay here tonight," he said softly. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do next. Is that okay?" Noah nodded once, then sat carefully on the edge of the bed, holding the painting upright in his lap. Daniel watched him for a moment before crouching in front of him, choosing his words slowly. "You know, your mother and I, we knew each other. A long time ago. Before you were born." Noah blinked, clearly interested but unsure where the conversation was going. "She was important to me," Daniel continued. "But I made mistakes. I left when I shouldn't have. I never knew she had a son." Noah didn't move, but his grip on the frame tightened. "She never told me much. Just that she loved someone once. And that he didn't stay." Daniel swallowed hard, the shame rising like a tide. "I don't know what she told you. But I think I might be your father." There. The words were out, heavy and quiet and impossible to take back. Noah stared at him, eyes wide, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak right away, just looked down at the painting again. "You were in one of her drawings," he said after a pause. "She never let me show it to anyone. But I saw it. It looked like you." Daniel felt his breath catch. He hadn't expected confirmation, not like this. He had prepared for denial, for confusion, even for anger. But the boy's calm acceptance unsettled him more than resistance would have. "I want to take care of you, Noah," he said softly. "I don't want to replace anything. I just want to be there now. If you'll let me." Noah's eyes searched his face for a long time, and finally, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, he asked, "Are you going to leave again?" Daniel shook his head, his voice steady this time. "No. I won't leave you. Not ever." There was no embrace. No tears. Just a quiet moment of truth between a man and a child who had both been missing something for a very long time. That night, after Noah fell asleep clutching the painting, Daniel sat in the living room staring out at the city lights. He thought about Elizabeth, about the choices he made, and the ones he still had time to make right. He didn't know how to be a father. But he knew how to stay. And for now, that was enough. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the penthouse through the massive windows, casting warm light across the polished floors. Daniel stood in the kitchen, staring into a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. His thoughts had barely rested through the night, and every quiet hour had been filled with memories he hadn't visited in years. He had spent so long believing he had made peace with his past, convincing himself that leaving Elizabeth behind was the price he had to pay to build the life he now led. But that illusion had collapsed with one painting, one boy, and a name that had never stopped echoing in the back of his mind. He heard small footsteps padding across the floor, followed by the soft creak of the guestroom door. Noah appeared, still wearing the same clothes from the day before, his hair rumpled from sleep, holding the painting against his chest like it was the only thing keeping him anchored. Daniel straightened and gave a small, tentative smile. "Morning," he said. "Are you hungry?" Noah nodded shyly but said nothing. Daniel gestured for him to sit at the counter, then began to prepare breakfast: eggs, toast, fruit, orange juice. He had no idea if Noah liked any of it, but it was the first thing he could offer that didn't feel borrowed. As they ate in silence, Daniel found himself watching the boy's every movement, not with judgment, but with quiet awe. He had never seen someone so young carry such gravity. Noah didn't fidget or whine. He didn't ask for anything. He just sat there quietly, chewing slowly, his eyes thoughtful and distant. After breakfast, Daniel gently asked if they could visit Elizabeth's old apartment. He explained that it might help them find more of her artwork or personal belongings. Noah agreed, and they drove across town to the small walk-up building where she had lived. The landlord, who had already been contacted by Daniel's assistant, allowed them in with a spare key. The apartment was modest and dim, but not cold. The walls were painted with fading color, and canvases leaned against almost every corner. The scent of oil paint and turpentine still lingered in the air, and Daniel's chest tightened with every breath he took. Noah walked through the rooms with careful steps, pointing out small things that had once belonged to his mother: a chipped mug, her favorite chair, a scarf she wore when painting. He led Daniel to a closet where, on the top shelf, they found a small wooden box filled with letters, old photos, and a few sketches that had clearly never been finished. Daniel opened one of the envelopes and found a letter addressed to him, written in Elizabeth's hand. He didn't read it aloud. He couldn't. The moment was too heavy, too intimate. But the words inside confirmed what he already felt in his bones. She had never forgotten him. She had never stopped loving him. And when she realized she was dying, she had chosen not to reach out, perhaps to protect him, perhaps out of fear. But she had written. She had wanted to tell him. After gathering a few of Elizabeth's things, they returned to the penthouse. Daniel placed her painting carefully on a stand in the living room, where it caught the afternoon light just right. He ordered clothes and books for Noah, filled the fridge with food a 6-year-old might like, and reached out to a lawyer to begin the guardianship process. But despite all of that, he knew there was one thing he hadn't done yet: talk to Noah about the future. That evening, as they sat side by side on the sofa, Daniel turned to him and spoke softly. "Noah, I know everything's changed really fast. And I don't expect you to have all the answers. But I want you to know that I'm not just here because I feel sorry or guilty. I'm here because I want to be. Because I should have been all along." Noah looked at him, eyes wide but calm. "Do you think my mom knew I'd find you?" he asked. Daniel's throat tightened, but he managed to reply. "I think she hoped you would. I think this painting was her way of leading you to me." Noah didn't say anything more that night. But he didn't let go of Daniel's hand for a long time. And in that quiet gesture, something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that neither of them was alone anymore, and that from this point forward, every step they took would be together. By the 5th day, the silence between Daniel and Noah had transformed into something gentler, less uncertain. The boy no longer hovered at the edges of rooms. He moved with more ease through the penthouse, slowly beginning to inhabit the space that had once felt so lifeless. Daniel watched it unfold almost with disbelief, the way a child's presence softened every corner, the way his footsteps filled the emptiness more fully than any art or furniture ever had. The air in the apartment was still quiet, but it was no longer hollow. It was full of breath, memory, and something that felt like the beginning of healing. That morning, Daniel took Noah to a bookstore a few blocks away. They didn't speak much on the walk over, but there was comfort in the rhythm of their pace, in the occasional glance Noah gave him before looking quickly away. Inside, Daniel let the boy roam. He watched as Noah gravitated toward a shelf of picture books, then eventually wandered into a section filled with sketch pads and colored pencils. He picked one up, examined it carefully, then looked back at Daniel without a word. Daniel nodded, and Noah tucked it under his arm. They left with a small stack of books, a new sketchpad, and a box of pencils. On the way home, Noah finally asked the question Daniel had been expecting since the first day. "What did you do before you found me?" Daniel hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because the answer no longer felt relevant. "I ran companies," he said slowly. "I worked a lot. I traveled. I made decisions that made people money. I told myself that was enough." Noah looked at him with an expression too old for his age. "Was it?" Daniel shook his head. "No. Not anymore." Later that day, Noah sat on the floor by the window, drawing quietly while Daniel read through emails he hadn't touched in days. But he couldn't concentrate. His gaze kept drifting to the boy, to the curve of his small shoulders, to the way his brow furrowed when he focused, just like Elizabeth used to. Eventually, Daniel set his phone down and walked over. "Can I see?" he asked. Noah hesitated, then turned the sketchpad toward him. It was a rough pencil drawing of the lake from the painting, but in this version, there were two figures standing by the shore, a tall man and a small boy, both looking at the water. The style wasn't perfect, but the emotion in it was unmistakable. Daniel felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It wasn't even sadness. It was a need to be present, to make sure that this boy never again had to stand alone holding the memory of someone he loved without knowing where to go. He knelt beside Noah and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Would you like to go see the real lake?" he asked. "The one your mother painted." Noah's eyes lit up with cautious hope. "We can." Daniel smiled. "We'll find it. I think she'd want us to." That evening, Daniel opened his old journals, records he had kept when he and Elizabeth were together. In one entry, he had written about a weekend trip they'd taken, a secluded lake a few hours outside the city where she had painted in the early morning while he tried to cook breakfast over a camp stove. He remembered how she had described the stillness there as holy, how she had once said it was the only place her thoughts felt quiet. He found the name of the lake, Silver Hollow, and printed directions to it. As Noah fell asleep that night, curled up with the new sketchpad in his arms, Daniel sat by the window watching the city breathe below. He thought about all the time he had wasted building walls around himself and how, in less than a week, a boy with his mother's heart had torn every one of them down without even trying. Daniel didn't know how to be everything Noah needed yet, but he had finally stopped running. And tomorrow, they would go to the lake. Together. The drive to Silver Hollow began early the next morning, the city still wrapped in its quiet haze as Daniel guided the car out of the familiar streets and onto the highway. Noah sat in the passenger seat, a small backpack on his lap, his new sketchpad tucked safely inside. He didn't ask where they were going again, he simply trusted, and that quiet trust humbled Daniel more than any boardroom challenge ever had. The road slowly shifted from concrete to winding country paths framed by trees in the golden hues of late fall. Daniel rolled down the windows slightly, letting the crisp air fill the car, and for the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. As they approached the lake, a hush seemed to settle over the landscape. The GPS guided them down a gravel road Daniel barely remembered until the trees opened up to reveal the water. It was exactly as he had recalled from that old journal entry, the surface perfectly still, the sky mirrored in its glassy expanse, and the surrounding pines swaying gently in the breeze. Noah stared through the window, not saying a word, and when the car stopped, he stepped out slowly, holding his sketchpad against his chest like it was something sacred. Daniel watched him walk to the edge of the water, and followed a few steps behind. For a long while, they both just stood there, looking. The silence between them was not empty, it was full of memory, of questions too big for words, and of a presence that neither of them could see but both could feel. It was as though Elizabeth had left a part of herself in this place, not just on canvas but in the very air. Noah finally sat down on a large flat rock by the shore and opened his sketchpad. Daniel didn't interrupt. He sat beside him, letting the sound of the breeze and birdsong carry the moment. Noah began to draw, not hurriedly but with careful, patient strokes. The lake, the trees, a small figure sitting alone, and slowly, another figure appeared beside it. Daniel didn't have to ask who they were. After some time, Noah looked up and asked quietly, "Did you and my mom come here together?" Daniel nodded. "A long time ago. Before you were born. She loved it here. She said it was the only place she could hear herself think." Noah didn't respond immediately, but his eyes scanned the shoreline, as if trying to imagine her there. "I think she wanted me to find you," he said finally. "I think she knew this painting would bring us here." Daniel's throat tightened, but he managed to speak. "I think so too. She was never someone who did anything by accident." They spent the afternoon walking the shoreline, collecting leaves and skipping stones. Daniel showed Noah the spot where he had taken the photo Elizabeth used as reference for the original painting, and together they found a tree near the water with the initials EM carved faintly into the bark. It was weathered, nearly hidden, but still there. Noah traced the letters with his fingers and smiled. Before they left, Daniel took a photo of Noah standing by the lake, holding his sketchpad, the water behind him glowing with the fading light. It wasn't posed or forced. It was a moment, real, simple, and full of everything that had been lost and found again. As they drove back, the boy fell asleep with his head resting against the car window, the sketchpad still on his lap. Daniel glanced at him and felt a surge of gratitude that almost knocked the wind from his lungs. He had been so close to missing all of this. He had nearly lived his entire life without knowing what it meant to love someone without expectation, to protect without needing control, to show up simply because you should. When they reached the city, Daniel carried Noah inside, laid him gently on the bed, and placed the sketchpad on the nightstand. He looked out the window for a long time after that, the image of the lake still vivid in his mind. He knew their journey wasn't over. There would be more questions, more paperwork, more difficult days. But now he understood what mattered most wasn't how they got here, it was that they did. Together. The following days passed with a rhythm Daniel had never experienced before. Each morning began not with emails or conference calls, but with the quiet sound of Noah's footsteps padding through the hallway, or the soft rustle of pages as he flipped through books while curled in the corner of the sofa. The apartment no longer felt like a museum of wealth and routine. It had been transformed, little by little, with drawings taped to the refrigerator, tiny socks draped over the arm of a chair, and laughter so quiet it echoed louder than anything Daniel had ever known. He wasn't used to it, this stillness that felt full instead of empty, but he welcomed it with an openness he didn't know he was capable of. One morning, as they sat together eating breakfast, Daniel received a message from the attorney managing the guardianship proceedings. The documents were ready. The next step would require a formal hearing and a home visit. Daniel explained it to Noah as carefully as he could, choosing every word with caution. He told him that nothing would be forced, that he only wanted to give them both the chance to stay together legally, not just emotionally. Noah looked up from his cereal with those same steady eyes that always seemed older than they should be. He asked, "If that happens, does that mean you're my real dad?" Daniel took a breath, not wanting to rush the answer. "Being your dad doesn't come from paperwork or names on a form," he said. "It means being here when you need me. It means listening when you're scared, showing up when you don't ask, and never walking away when things get hard. That's what I want to be for you. Whether we sign anything or not." Noah didn't say much after that, but he leaned into Daniel's side as they watched a cartoon together on the couch, and Daniel felt something click into place that no legal process could touch. Later that week, Daniel arranged for them to return to Elizabeth's old apartment one last time. He wanted Noah to choose what to keep. They took the subway, which Noah insisted on, and when they arrived, Daniel gave him space to explore without pressure. In her bedroom, Noah opened a drawer and pulled out a small wooden jewelry box. Inside were a few earrings, a pressed flower, and a folded photograph. He handed the photo to Daniel. It was of Elizabeth, young and laughing, standing at the lake with her arms open. Daniel remembered taking it. She had insisted he capture the moment, even though she usually hated being in front of the camera. He framed that photo when they got home and placed it in the hallway outside Noah's new room. It was a quiet tribute, not just to her, but to everything she had unknowingly gifted them. That evening, after dinner, Noah sat at the kitchen counter sketching while Daniel worked nearby. Out of nowhere, Noah asked, "Did you love her?" Daniel paused, set down his pen, and turned toward him. "I did. I always did. Even when I didn't know how to show it." Noah nodded, his expression unreadable. "She loved you too. She didn't say it much, but I could tell when she looked at the painting." Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Instead, he walked over, placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder, and stood there for a moment, letting the silence say what words never could. That night, as Noah fell asleep, Daniel sat on the balcony alone with the city below him and the memory of Elizabeth beside him. He had spent years believing that love meant sacrifice, that one could not chase purpose and still hold on to people. But now he understood that true purpose came not from achievement but from connection. And somehow, through loss, through pain, and through a child who had walked into his life with nothing but a painting, he had been given the chance to begin again. The morning of the court hearing arrived with a gray sky and steady rain that seemed to quiet the entire city. Daniel stood in front of the mirror adjusting his tie, but his reflection no longer held the sharpness or detachment of the man he had been just weeks before. There was something softer in his posture now, something grounded. Behind him, in the living room, Noah was tugging on the sleeves of his new jacket, one Daniel had chosen carefully, not too formal, but something that made him look cared for. When Daniel turned around, Noah met his eyes with a look that carried more trust than any words ever could. The car ride to the courthouse was quiet but not tense. Daniel explained what would happen, that they would sit down and answer a few questions, and that there would be a person from the court who would want to talk to Noah alone just to make sure he was okay with everything. Noah nodded but didn't seem afraid. If anything, he looked ready. Like someone who had already faced the hardest parts of life and had decided not to run from anything else. Inside the courthouse, the walls felt cold and unfamiliar, but Daniel stayed close. When they were called in, he reached for Noah's hand, and the boy held on without hesitation. The judge was kind but firm, a woman in her 50s with glasses that magnified her calm, observant eyes. She read through the documents, asked Daniel about his decision, and listened as he spoke, not like a businessman delivering a pitch, but like a man who had finally stopped lying to himself. He told her about Elizabeth, about the time he had lost, and about the moment he realized what truly mattered. He didn't pretend to be perfect. He admitted he had failed once but that he was here now because he had no intention of ever failing again. When it was Noah's turn to speak, he stood up on his own. He didn't fidget or stumble. He looked the judge in the eye and said, "He found me." He didn't have to, but he did. My mom used to say the people who stay are the ones who matter. I think she wanted me to find him. The courtroom was silent after that. The judge studied them both for a long moment, then smiled gently. "I think your mother would be proud of you both." The papers were signed within the hour. Daniel Hart was officially Noah Marshall's legal guardian. But neither of them mentioned that word again once they stepped outside. It wasn't about titles or documents anymore. It was about what had already happened between them, long before the courtroom validated it. That night, back at the apartment, Daniel ordered takeout and let Noah choose the movie. They ate on the couch, their plates balanced in their laps, laughing at scenes that probably wouldn't have seemed funny to Daniel weeks ago. Afterward, Noah disappeared into his room and returned carrying the painting, the original lake, the one his mother had created. He held it out to Daniel and said, "I want it to hang here. In the living room. So we always remember how we found each other." Daniel nodded and helped him hang it on the wall across from the windows. The light from the city reflected off the surface, making the water in the painting shimmer faintly like it was still alive. They stood side by side looking at it for a long while. Then Noah turned to Daniel and asked, "Do you think she knows?" Daniel placed his hand on the boy's shoulder and answered without hesitation. "I think she's been with us this whole time." As the night deepened and the apartment settled into silence, Daniel watched Noah fall asleep with his sketchpad beside him and realized this was the life he hadn't known he was waiting for. A life not built on legacy or fortune, but on small choices, second chances, and a boy with steady eyes who had given him a reason to stop walking alone. The ending of this story is powerful not because it ties everything up perfectly, but because it offers something far more meaningful: quiet redemption. Daniel's transformation isn't sudden or dramatic, it's slow, human, and deeply earned. What begins as guilt and disbelief gradually becomes love, responsibility, and something even rarer for someone like him, vulnerability. He doesn't save Noah in the way we often expect in stories like this. Instead, Noah saves him just as much. I think what makes the conclusion so moving is that it honors grief without letting it win. Elizabeth's absence is felt in every moment, yet her presence lingers in the painting, the lake, and in Noah himself. The fact that a child's quiet strength could lead a man so far from who he used to be back toward who he was meant to become, that's the kind of hopeful, emotional truth that sticks with you long after the last line. It's not just a story about reunion. It's about becoming whole again through unexpected love.